Hi there, I'm Duane Laflin. I am a person who writes adventure fiction, and this particular video is for others who write adventure fiction. The big question is, should we or should we not write from an outline? And I have an unofficial, non-scientific statistic for you. I cannot prove this, but I think it's well worth consideration. My statistic is 80% of those who write adventure fiction would write better and faster if they worked from an outline. Now, there's no doubt that some of you can succeed as a pantser, which means you just make it up as you go. You may be one of those people. However, I would like you to consider my thinking. I would like for you to watch this video anyway, because I think many of the people who think they're pantsers, they're convinced they're pantsers, are fooling themselves, and they actually are hindering their own writing. They would do better, and writing would even be more fun for them if they learned to work from an outline. So, on this matter, I have three things I'd like you to consider. Number one, experts disagree about the value of outlining, but the split is not 50-50. Number two, adventure fiction is a genre with unique requirements. Number three, what does an outline for adventure fiction look like? We start with point number one. Experts disagree about the value of outlining, but the split is not 50-50. There's a peculiar thing about being an author, and it's very important to say this, and I think to remind ourselves of it, and that is individuals can follow totally different paths and yet succeed. There is no one proper way to write a novel. There's no one proper way to approach writing a novel. There is no one formula for writing a book that applies to everyone. And we need to know this. And when we approach the subject of outlining a novel, we certainly find ample evidence of this. Listen to what extremely successful writers say. And you're going to find some incredible, totally polar opposite kind of points of view. Incredible, when I say incredible, what I really mean is incredible differences of opinion. So, Stephen King, he says, outlines are the last resource of bad fiction writers who wish to God they were writing master's theses, which means Stephen King doesn't believe in outlining. Lee Child says, never outline. No doubt about his opinion, expressed it in just 2 words. Ray Bradbury said, an outline stifles creativity. Find out what your hero wants, then just follow him, which meant he just sort of let the story go where it happened. He wrote with what some would refer to as a stream of consciousness. Well, at the opposite end of the spectrum, we find Dan Brown. He says, I don't start writing until I have a very solid outline, or else I would get to the end and find out there is no ending, and I just wasted 3 years of my life. My outline for the Da Vinci Code was 100 pages. Jeffrey Deaver says, I plan all of my books very carefully. I spend about 8 months outlining the story from start to finish before I write a single word of prose. And I do the same thing for the arc of an entire series. James Patterson says, the most common mistakes that writers make, especially young writers, is they don't outline. Dave Barry says, I really need to know where I'm going with fiction to write it in a way that at least I am happy with. And I really think that a lot of fiction books end badly because terrific writers said, I'll just figure it out and plunge in. And what he's saying is, they thought they would just figure it out and plunged in, but they didn't figure it out, or else what they figured out wasn't very good, and he believes if they had an outline, it would have been better. So what conclusion do we draw from this diversity in point of view? I've actually drawn 2 conclusions. First, some can be terrific writers with no outline at all. I don't deny that. We cannot deny that. We have to accept it as truth. Some of you watching this may be such a person. But my second conclusion is, in my research, I found far more successful writers saying you should outline than those that didn't. In other words, this is my point. It's not a 50-50 matter. 50% on one side, 50, and it's more like 80-20. About 80% of the successful writers I find, especially in the realm of adventure fiction, about 80% seem to think an outline is better. So I think for us as writers, we might say to ourselves, if the split's more like 80-20, then it's more likely I'm in the 80 than the 20. In other words, I might be one of those people who might be better off learning to outline. Now, I do want to make it clear that this is mainly where I'm researching writers of thrillers and adventure fiction. If we went off into romance and fantasy and other genres, I'm not sure what we'd find. However, Brandon Sanderson, who writes fantasy and is known for his phenomenal success as a fantasy fiction writer, he says, "I am a writer who works from an outline." And when he teaches on the subject of writing, he recommends using an outline. He recognizes that some can get by without him, but he always says, if you're a beginning writer, try using an outline. So this is something I just don't think we should ignore. And that is a very large proportion of people who write adventure fiction do outline. I was privileged to personally meet 4 of the authors who now write for Clive Cussler or carry on his name in their series. Clive passed away, but his books stay alive by way of these writers. All 4 of the authors told me they outline their books. And in particular, the conversation I had with one, he says he spends at least 3 months outlining his book before he writes the story. I'm suggesting we pay attention to that. We consider it. And if you've not tried outlining a book, why not at least try it and see if it makes a difference? Well, let's keep going on this. Number 2, second major thing I want to say is adventure fiction is a genre with unique requirements. I do believe different genres call for variations in writing style. The slam, bang, crisp sentences that work well in thrillers may not work so well in romance books. The extensive descriptions in fantasy novels wherein new worlds are built would bog down a detective story set in Los Angeles, California, where people pretty much already have a picture in their minds. Well, in my opinion, adventure fiction should be fast-paced, and I say my opinion, I think almost everyone's opinion about adventure fiction is it needs to move along well. And if it's a long story, and I write most of my books, adventure fiction, around 80,000 words. Some writers go more than that, and of course some go less. But anyway, if it's a long story and we want fast-paced adventure, well then the book can't just have 1 or 2 predicaments or action scenes. If you only got 2 action scenes in 80,000 words, it's probably not adventure fiction. Readers expect conflict and challenges for the protagonist. And if these things aren't present, well then, it's not the kind of book they were looking for. So the question then is, how do we make sure we have enough action scenes, we have enough predicaments? For my own writing, I continually ask myself, am I on the verge of boring my readers? Do I have too much dialogue, too much description, too much backstory without excitement? Have I gone too long without the hero getting himself into a mess or helping get somebody else out of a mess? And I ask these questions even when I'm working with an outline. I do outline, but without an outline, I think the matter would be a far bigger concern. Because with the outline, I can pause and take a look at the story arc. I know what the climax is going to be. I know how the tale twists and turns on the way to the climax. I can say to myself, yes, well, here's a point of conflict. Here's a dilemma. Here's where the next conflict is. Here's where the next dilemma is. Yes, over the course of 80,000 pages, I do have a number of things that are going to satisfy a person who's reading this book because he wants it to be an action-adventure kind of story. And my point is, I think when you're writing action adventure, when you're depicting challenges, stories speed up. And a story that speeds up burns through a lot of content. And by content, I mean specific concepts, specific episodes. We're rarely going to spend multiple chapters describing one lethal encounter. If fight scenes, gun battles, jumping from cliffs, escaping burning buildings, leaping from a train that's about to crash. If we take any one of those things and spend thousands and thousands of words describing it, it will really bog down the book, right? No, you don't spend multiple chapters describing one fight scene. There may be rare occasions where it's extended for some reason, but generally speaking, you're not going to spend multiple chapters, which means, and my point is then, If a fight scene can be covered just in one major chapter, and then you've got a lot of other chapters to go, well, then you need other exciting things that are going to happen. And it's very helpful to have planned ahead to know what those other exciting things are going to be. So, rather than describing a few conflict points in voluminous detail, we are describing many conflict points thoroughly yet precisely, which brings us to having an outline where we can study and make sure our storyline will have the predicaments, the action scenes, and challenges that we need. The most recent book I wrote, which will be released in this coming June, called The Treasure Whale, I actually had more action ideas in my outline that I ended up using. And so I took several of those things and I'll carry them over to another book and another story. And I think that's a good problem. I would far rather have too many outline ideas or too many ideas in my outline that I can use than to discover I don't have enough. So outlining allows me to plan ahead to make sure I have the material to satisfy the need of the adventure fiction genre. And this brings me to the third and final point of this presentation. What does an outline for adventure fiction look like? When I first started writing novels, I experimented with outlining and I gave up on it. And that's one of the reasons I'm making this video. If you don't think you're an outliner, I'd like you to reconsider, because I thought for a while I wasn't somebody who would outline. I thought I must be a pantser. And then I discovered what an outline is, and it changed everything. For outlining for writing a novel is not like outlining in high school or for a college thesis. It's not about having Roman numerals and then smaller numbers and trying to have everything look balanced. Not at all. Rather, outlining for writing a novel, and this is how I discovered when I started researching how successful authors do it, it's basically just creating a map for your story. It's saying, in chapter 1, this is basically what I plan to write about. In chapter 2, this is what will happen. In chapter 3, this is what will happen. That sort of thing. Now, I want to elaborate on this a little bit, and I'll try to be as practical as I can. I don't know where I saw it first, but someone recommended starting your story outline based on a problem, failed attempts to solve it, and then success. And they had a general arc for a story involving what I'm about to show you. However, this is my modification. I don't remember where I first saw it first, and I changed some things. But basically, when I'm going to write another book, I ask myself, what's the problem? So I start by introducing a problem. What is the main challenge my hero will face? Then I go, what's the plan? My hero's going to have to make some sort of plan to solve this problem. Then how does he execute the plan? What happens when he tries to do this thing that he thinks will be the solution? Then the plan fails. If it doesn't, it's going to be a very short book. So you describe how the plan fails. Then the hero regroups and makes a new plan. He examines his mistake, he reconsiders the problem, he approaches it from another angle. The plan fails again, and this time things get worse, which adds to the excitement of the book. Something goes wrong. The hero's in a mess that now is going to be extremely difficult to escape. The hero takes on this final adversity. He's in this final mess. Now he works through the challenge, he gets creative to overcome it, and he succeeds. And that's the next point. The hero solves the problem, and you write how that occurs. And then you have the aftermath, where you tie up the loose ends and you come to a satisfactory conclusion. So this doesn't look like an outline you're going to see for a college thesis or a paper in high school, but this is what I mean. You have a skeleton of an idea, and you look at this before you start writing the book, and you say, okay, this is basically where I plan to go. This is the basic map. So I start with that, and I analyze it, and then once I feel like, okay, I've got this general idea for the story, then the next thing I do, and again, I call it an outline, but it's really not an outline, but it's what I've discovered others who outline, this is what they mean. I do a chapter synopsis. And synopsis may not be the best word, because I don't try to write it fancy or all. For my style of writing, I create 40 chapters. Now, in my books, they always have more than 40 chapters. But I've discovered for outline and preparing, 40 chapters works, because I know some of those will get split into 2 chapters. I know as I start writing, I'm going to come up with things a little different than what I plan. But if I plan 40, that's going to help me. And in chapter 1, I simply make bullet points. Chapter 1, this is going to happen, this is going to happen, this is going to happen. Then chapter 2, the same thing. More bullet points. This is going to happen. These are the key points. I might have in some of my chapters, so-called chapter synopses, I might just have 2 or 3 bullet points, maybe 1 or 2. Sometimes I might have 6 or 7. But basically, I'm thinking ahead of time of where I want to go with the book and where I want to go chapter by chapter. Now, once I have that done, then it really gets fun, because I examine what I've written. And I say, is there enough action? Is there enough interesting things happen? Is this going to be boring or is it not? And then I start looking for things I can add. I always have a file of brainstorming ideas, a news article I saw, something interesting I read somewhere, and I might glance at that file. Is there anything over here that would fit into this chapter, 40 chapter thing that I just wrote out? Is there anything I can add that would tweak it and make it more interesting? And of course, I also, if I'm planning some sort of mystery, I try to examine these 40 chapters and say, where are the clues dropped? Where are the key things? Maybe the best thing is just to give you a sample. My most recent book, The Treasure Whale, starts with a prologue, and here's what the outline for the prologue looks like. As you can see, nothing fancy. 1886, start with a mutiny attempt, men trying to take the captain's jewels. The Portuguese ship captain finds rubies. As you can see, it's just kind of a collection of thoughts. And then chapter 1, Thomas meets this woman called Fiona Sophia. He's coming out of a restroom in a football stadium. That's how the character's introduced. He spills sweet tea on fans. So I've just got these ideas, and that's what I worked from to write the book. Now, the prologue, it was around 10,000 words, but that's all I had for the outline in preparing it. My chapters usually run somewhere between 1,000 and 2,000 words. That's kind of the general thing. And yet, I just had these 4 points, but that's all I needed to start writing the chapter. So this brings us to the big question. And I think this is the most important question relating to everything I've said, and that is, do I closely follow the outline? How closely do I follow it? And in answering it, the first thing to say is the outline is not my boss, it's my servant. I can ignore it or alter it anytime I choose. My books never end up following the outline perfectly. And very often they vary tremendously from what the outline originally was. And you say, well, does that mean I shouldn't have outlined? No. That's a good thing, because what it means is the outline did not stifle my creativity. It did not restrict my characters from taking on lives of their own. Instead, it gave me a framework to flesh out any way I wanted. It gave me a map that set me in a wonderful direction, and yet it gave me freedom to do some sightseeing and change my plans along the way. So, in conclusion, and thank you for listening to this as long as you have, most people who write adventure fiction, in my opinion, would do better if they figure out what their story's going to be from beginning to end before they start writing it. And then they write it with freedom to change the story as it progresses. But the important thing is they know where they're headed, and they know the plan to get to where they're headed. And one last thing. If you still think you're in the group of people who doesn't need to outline, how about at least try and experiment? How about trying to do like I said? Go back to the idea of the problem, how he tries to solve the problem. Just kind of do some thinking about that. And then see if you can make a little list of chapters and just make some notes as far as what would go in those. Just try it, play with it, tweak it. And it might be if you try this concept once, well, you'll keep doing it from this point forward. So that's all I'm going to say about this. Keep on writing. Thanks for taking time to watch this video. My name's Duane Laflin. I love sharing ideas. I love writing my stories. If you're interested in checking out my stories, go to DuaneLaflin.com. My specialty is exactly what this is about: action, adventure, adventure fiction. That's it. Take care. Bye-bye.